and good morning and welcome to another live stream today. First things first, I really need everyone's help. I need 1,000 subscribers on my YouTube channel so I can get a little bit of income from it. At the moment, I'm paying for everything out of pocket, and it's getting harder and harder as the days go by. Just like everyone else, it's we're struggling financially. So if you could please hit that subscribe button, then go to the notifications and select all. It'll take you less than a minute to do that. So I'd really appreciate your support. Today we're going to talk to Greens MP Abagail Boyd about the sustainability of the NDIS and her views and opinions on that. Good morning.
Good
Abagail.
morning. Good
Do you
morning.
prefer Abagail or Abby?
Abagail. My parents call me Abby when I'm in trouble, mainly. But
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, my daughter's the exact opposite. She's Abby and Abagail when she's in trouble.
Fair enough.
But yeah, so what are your views and experiences with the NDIS?
So I guess I've been a New South Wales politician now for just over 6 years, and I've held the disability portfolio for the New South Wales Greens during that time. And it was a little bit of a learning curve from a state perspective to see, I guess, what the impact of the NDIS was, and specifically how many people it left behind. So from a state perspective, the NDIS came in, and it appeared that the states thought that meant that they had no responsibility at all for people with disability following that point. And it, seemed to astonish them. I remember having conversations with the ministers, 5-6 years ago. They're astonished that there was only, I think, 9 or 10% of people with a disability on the NDIS. And even for those people, the NDIS is not the end of the story, obviously. And so it's been a bit of a journey. And now with the latest NDIS review and putting back some of the responsibilities onto the states through foundational supports, we're having again this kind of scrambling from the states to understand what the impact of the NDIS is. But I guess, big picture, I think the NDIS was a promising idea that unfortunately became so marketized, I guess. I don't know if that's the word, but maybe the sort of marketization of the NDIS, and I think a reluctance to fund it properly has led to it, in my understanding and experience based on the people who contact my office, it's not held the promise that we hoped it would.
Well, I remember when the NDIS first came in, every state in Australia dropped all their disability services and pushed everyone onto the NDIS. So the states basically no longer have any disability services. Now the federal government wants the states to bridge the gap between the NDIS and people acquiring a disability or being born with a disability. So they have to restructure all that service that they held for decades and decades and decades up until the introduction of the NDIS. I see that as one of the bugbears that I have with the NDIS, is that all the state services evaporated basically overnight.
I think also the NDIS has led to this medicalisation of disability. It's very much of the medical model rather than the social model of disability, and it's meant that, in addition to it being incredibly hard to this idea of having to prove your disability in order to get any support from NDIS, and then the whole bureaucracy acting against the the promises of autonomy and self-management that the NDIS promised. It's also led to the states then saying, and I know in New South Wales very much, the idea is if you don't have a diagnosis, or if you're not disabled enough, I'm saying that in quotation marks, disabled enough to meet the NDIS, then you don't need any support. As opposed to what we know is that people come in all shapes and sizes and need different levels of support depending on where they're at. And really, we should be working towards a society that includes and supports people, at whatever sort of supports that they need. So I think in a lot of ways, at a state level, we've seen I guess, an encouragement of that ableism that then excludes support for so many people.
Yeah, I think, I've been on the NDIS for about 10 years. And I think one of the biggest problems with the sustainability of the NDIS is the cost blowouts. And I don't see that as the problem with the participant. I see, the main reason for that being the costs of goods like electric wheelchairs and hoists, and they've gone up. Because when I first got my first disability in '89, an electric wheelchair, a good one, was worth about $6,000 to $8,000. Now the price of a car. Electric wheelchairs are like $50,000, $60,000, and how much money is going into profits for those people selling those wheelchairs and other goods such as that people with disabilities need.
Yeah, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there, because that is the problem as I see it as well. I think this, I talked before about this commercialization of NDIS. It's encouraged people to treat disability services and products as a market first, and not about people and what people need. I think that sort of pumping money towards the private sector rather than the public sector taking responsibility for not just the provision of public services, but also, we're perfectly capable of building all sorts of things from the public purse, but we choose not to. And I think, yes, allowing profit takers to come in and profit off of, the price of wheelchairs is pretty disgusting. And that's kind of what the system has encouraged.
Absolutely. And I'm not just blaming, wheelchairs. Like, I've had to get a new bed through the NDIS, and the one that supports my back and lifts my legs and all that sort of stuff, because I've got spinal cord issues as well. The price of most of the goods since the introduction of the NDIS, the costs have gone through the roof, and I'm just wondering, why isn't the government, like the federal government, or even the state government, why aren't they being the regulators of the NDIS and finding out, how much money that these companies are making from the profits of these items? Because the more money that goes into profits is less money that goes to supports, for support workers and to getting the supports that people need.
That's right. And they talk about sustainability and cost blowouts, and their response is to then cut off people and to blame people with a disability who need the supports, rather than actually looking at the big end of town and the people who are making profits off of everything. And we see this in so many parts of society now, where government has decided not to stand up and directly regulate corporations, which they absolutely could do, but instead they find it easier to sort of punch down on people who are not perhaps as politically influential as some of these big providers of services. And I think that says it all, really, when you've got government happy to boot people off of NDIS and to come out with some really disgusting narrative in the media, I think, as well, about people, people claiming off of the system in a way that they shouldn't, when we all know that the cost blowouts are from the cost of services and goods, and also, fraud at a provider level. But that's not as talked about, because it's not as easy to deal with politically as it is to just, once again, not provide people with what they need.
Absolutely. I mean, I interviewed Professor John Gilroy. He teaches Aboriginal health and disabilities at Sydney University, and he said since the introduction of the NDIS, it's taken the humanity out of the government assistance. It's
Mm,
more focused on the bureaucracy and you know getting the right reports that they actually admitted they don't read.
yeah,
Employing people who have no knowledge or experience on working with people with disabilities at all. People from used to work for the tax office or used to be a cleaner or someone used to be a shop assistant, getting jobs in the NDIA, who are now
mm,
telling people with disabilities what they can and can't have, how they should and shouldn't use things. It's just I don't know. It just makes life so much harder.
yeah. And the whole system was set up with that attitude of gatekeeping. And I've spoken to a lot of people who, when they first started, when the NDIA was first rolling out offices and people were working in those offices, and they were really appalled at, finding out that their job was to effectively deny people support. And so when you set up an organization that is all about double, triple checking that somebody needs support before they're given it, and the scrutiny on plans and getting people to reprove disabilities in order to renew their plans, and all of that, it's an attitude of exclusion rather than support. It's a very unfortunate reality from, as I say, what was going to be something that was life changing. The NDIS, I think, has been quite a failure in a lot of respects.
And I agree. And I've had people contact me saying that they've lost $50,000 worth of their funding, and they've gotten cold calls about their plans, and unbeknownst to them, that was actually a plan review, and their funding's been dropped, and uh, things like that are going. And like you mentioned before about the media, they're always quite happy to slip the boot in and blame people with disabilities.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, and I've had enough of it. I've an absolute gutful of the media's attitude
it's
towards.
real, and it's real ableism, and that's it. Again, we've got this sort of um, this exclusionary attitude, this othering of people with disability that I think is exacerbated through the NDIS, and the fact that it's so limited in its coverage of the disability community at large. The way that it is that sort of gatekeeping and making people jump through hoops, it's been set up in a way that mimics a kind of Centrelink, like a welfare sort of vibe, as opposed to just being about giving people the bare necessities to thrive. Like it's wrong-headed, and I think it really is exacerbating the general attitudes of ableism in society. And that comes through in the media then. And my office gets a huge number of people complaining about really poor treatment and discrimination from taxi drivers, from people at Service New South Wales, people at wherever. This really disgusting levels of vilification and discrimination against people with disability. And I think that, that's a lot of that does rest with the political response and the way that they talk about things like the NDIS.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I've tried to contact Bill Shorten when he was the minister in charge of the NDIS, and every time I wrote to him and tried to contact me, he'd always fob me off to the NDIS, and it was always the same response. Um, what do you see we need to do to change? Because I believe the change has got to come from the top down, not from the
Mm.
bottom up. So what do you see that needs to change to make the NDIS more sustainable?
I think people need to start actually listening to people with disability. I think we see review after review, things like the Royal Commission, where the voices of people are very clearly put out there. And we have recommendations that are really good quality. The the Disability Royal Commission, I was incredibly pleased with a lot of those recommendations that came out, but they've just been ignored by politicians. And so I think that shows you just how little attention I think a lot of politicians are actually paying to people with disability. And so I think trying to get people at the top to actually understand people with disability and the community, and then also start listening to them is easier said than done. There are very few people with disability who are in politics, which is a real shame. We get a couple, and I think that's great. But in New South Wales Parliament, there's a quiet few of us with a neurodivergent disability, but there's only one person in our parliament with a physical disability. And I think that sort of exclusion of voices, when we've got, almost 20% by some calculations of the population, living with a disability, I find it extraordinary that our political representation doesn't reflect that diversity. I think that would help if it did. But ultimately, you can't make people do things, but I just wish that these major political parties in particular would actually listen to the expert advice being given to them every day by the disability community.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, in my opinion, that change needs to come from the top down. But how can we expect that to happen when, like, the NDIS board and the Independent Advisory Council are all handpicked by the Minister of the NDIS and put in those positions? They're supposed to be our representatives, but from what I've tried to contact members of the IAC and members of the NDIS board, and not one person has ever responded to me. And I've heard along the grapevine that they're basically on a gag order, that they can't talk to anyone. So how can we get true representation when we're being ignored?
Yeah. It's extraordinarily frustrating. I think if there's any positive sort of news, I guess, out of all of this, is I have experienced in the last 6 years an increasing, I guess, coming together of different groups in New South Wales, different advocacy groups and civil society groups who are joining together to try and advocate at elections and other times for a better deal for disabled people. But I think there's a way to go. But ultimately, when politicians aren't listening, the only thing that gets through to them is a vote. And with so many people with disability and others, who are allies, I feel like we can try and make a bigger difference at the future elections, to make sure that people are actually listening. And try and elect some more representatives with disability. I think that would help as well.
Yeah, but the trouble is that, once you join from what I understand, once you join a political party, you've got to adopt their policies, and even though you might not agree with them.
Well, I would never do that, which is why I'm with the party where I do agree with our policies. But people can stand as independents. I think even just standing for election, you don't need to win to actually put the issues that you care about on the agenda, because you start, forcing the other candidates to actually talk about those issues just by the fact of standing. But of course, that's not going to solve things in the short term. In the short term, we have politicians who simply don't want to listen, and I wish I had an easy answer for how you get them to listen. I've been trying for a very long time. I thought that when the coalition government was replaced in New South Wales, that the Labor government would be much better. Unfortunately, they were not. And so, consistently we see disability rights and inclusion being just an absolute final thought for most political parties. And it's a real problem.
Yeah, I think for the major parties, it's a matter of just ticking that box. You know, um, you know, the thing that we need to do is to rein in the cost blowout is to look at the market, where people in the business are making, you know, a lot of profit
Yeah.
markups. And I mean, I've had, I'll give you this as a personal example. I wanted to put a balcony out my back door because I have a step that I struggle to get over. So I wanted to build it at floor level, so I would just walk out onto a wooden veranda and have it gently sloping down towards the grass at the back.
Mm.
I got 2 quotes. I told the first builder we were paying for it ourselves, and I told the second one, we're gonna try and get it funded through the NDIS. Well, the first one came back, it was just over $7,000. The one I told we're going through the NDIS come back over $14,000. Yeah, so what's the government going to do to stop this from happening? I mean, they're obviously gouging it because they see it as an endless bucket of money.
Mm. Yeah, that's right. And the government has powers to step in and do that if they were actually inclined to do so. Absolutely. I think those sorts of stories are really, unfortunately, they're very common, but I think they're really valuable as well in terms of if you can find media who actually are sort of friendly media and want to do the right thing. There's a lot of mileage in a good expose about just how outrageous some of these providers are when they're faced with something being NDIS and marking it up. So, but yeah, I mean, this is something the government absolutely should be regulating and should be looking at and making sure it doesn't happen. And the fact that they're choosing not to is a real indictment on them. But yeah.
But how do we, as people with disabilities who don't have that voice,
Mm.
make those people listen, like make the federal government listen to what we're saying, to get them to regulate the people who provide the goods. I use a service provider. They're non-profit, and they're the best service providers I've ever had. So I'm not going to complain about service providers because the majority of, overwhelming majority of those service providers do a fantastic job, and so do the support workers. But I think what we need to look at is the cost markup, the profit markup on those goods being provided to the NDIS, and the NDIS won't buy second-hand items like a
Mm.
second-hand wheelchair that someone may have passed away and it's still perfectly good,
Yeah.
and they won't take it back and give it to another person. It's
Mm.
just ridiculous. So how can we as people that don't have a voice reach out to those people in power
Mm.
to get them to listen?
Well, thankfully, I mean, at a federal level, you've got the fabulous Jordan Steele John for the Greens, he's only one person, but he's trying very hard to raise those issues as well. So if your advocacy to particular ministers isn't working, then I do recommend that you reach out to the crossbench. And certainly Jordan's doing a fantastic job trying to push those issues, but he's ultimately he's just one person in that parliament, and the Greens don't have as much power as is necessary to get those sorts of changes. So it's tricky, but the more of that sort of information you feed through to the Greens and other crossbenchers, they can be raising those issues and causing a fuss. I wish I had an easier answer. I wish that we could just write to these people and they would just listen. But unfortunately, that's not how politics works.
But I mean, that's why people just give up and just walk away from these issues, because there's no outcomes to people raising their voices and standing up for themselves. It's hard enough living with a disability. and also have the added pressure of trying to get people to listen. The amount of times I've had to explain to people that, because I think that we get the funding from the NDIS, it goes in our bank accounts. And, no, it doesn't. You got to send your invoices and your justification for goods and services to a fund manager or directly to the NDIS. So we don't control that money at all. And that's one thing I've had to explain a few times to the average person on the street. And I've had one woman contact me and ask me for help, and she's provided the NDIS with 33 different reports from specialists, GPs, and physios. And she's still fighting, and the NDIS has asked for another three more reports.
Yeah, it's unacceptable.
And just consider, like, each report can cost between $1,500 to $3,000. Again, cost blowout. And the NDIS has come out and admitted they don't read the reports.
Yeah. The whole system has become about cost gatekeeping and not about individuals. It's very depressing. I am sorry, you were about to say something.
No, I'm just took a deep breath. I was getting frustrated and worked up because of
I don't blame you, and I this might frustrate you more, but I had a debate last week in Parliament with the housing minister. So I've been advocating for however many years for New South Wales to sign on to the minimum accessibility standards under the National Construction Code. And New South Wales and WA are the only sort of holdout states not to do that. And we're only talking about silver accessibility. It's not even a particularly onerous standard. But New South Wales government, both the coalition prior to 2023 and now Labor, refuse because they worry about its impact on developers, which is just absurd. But anyway, last week I was asking them to at least tell us how much of their affordable social housing is of a certain level of accessibility, and if they could tell me, for instance, if there was a level entrance way to how many houses and that kind of thing. They were setting up a new register where they were asking for information on how many bedrooms, but they weren't asking for information on accessibility. And I asked them, tried to put an amend into a bill to make them do that. And the housing minister's response was that although they're sympathetic to the idea, it's actually very difficult to design a form or whatever to collect that information. And that really ticked me off. And so I stood up and said, you know what's difficult? Difficult is being a person in a wheelchair trying to get into a house and trying to find housing that you can actually use, and you can live in the same way as everyone else. And people with disability also require affordable housing. But it was this idea that somehow it was so difficult for the housing department to design something to collect the most basic information. It was such a slap in the face to people who struggle every single day just to get around because of the way we've chosen to build society. I don't need to tell you this, it's extraordinary, the ignorance and the ableism that permeates so much of politics.
Yeah, and I agree, and I've had this discussion many, many times over the last 15 years. They think because we have Australian standards, that's acceptable. And I keep saying, no, the Australian standards are the absolute minimum requirements that developers need to have to make it accessible. What we need is best practice. So what's not just good for today, but what's going to be good in the next 20, 30 years as well. So we don't have to come back in a few years' time and modify it for wider wheelchairs and wider mobility scooters and that sort of thing. So Australian standards mean nothing to me, really.
No.
They do nothing. They're the absolute barest minimum requirements that developers need, and it doesn't meet the needs.
And again, there's this reliance on the market. Again, we get told by governments that they don't need to mandate accessible housing, because if there was a market for it, then the market would provide it, which of course is nonsense. It just results in people having to, buy expensive retrofits, or simply just not having access to the same level of housing as other people. But yeah, it's
Yeah. Well, here where I live in Armadale, there was a development approved for SDA, but when the DA first went through, it went through as townhouses, but all of a sudden the SDA accommodation, and inside the buildings was really good, but there's no footpaths and there's no pedestrian crossings. It's on a highway, and we're asking, how did this happen? How did this get past council, where it went through, it's supposed to go through as townhouses, then all of a sudden they make it SDA accommodation, and people can't access it through the footpaths, and there's no pedestrian crossings. I don't know.
Sorry, does council have a disability advisory group or something? Do they have a committee? Do they have anything that could sort of help them with that kind of thing?
Yes, I'm on that committee, and unfortunately I can't speak as a member of that committee. It's against the committee's
fair enough. Sounds like you're not being listened to.
Well,
council.
Yeah, I can talk to you after we finish the stream about it, but I don't want. I can't do it publicly.
I don't want to get you in trouble.
No, because we had a forced amalgamation in 2016, and then they got rid of the access committee, and I fought for a couple of years to get it going again, but it's not going as I thought it would do. They're just ticking boxes at the moment. So, but yeah, I can't speak on behalf or represent the Access Committee without their permission in case I say something wrong. But yeah, but I mean, those sorts of things from the local government to state government to the federal government, with these developers, they should be held to more accountability. Not just inside the building, but to and from those buildings.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the amount of times, again, we do a lot of representation from our office on behalf of people who are unable to travel places because, it really beggars belief that people haven't picked this up for themselves. But you'll get a construction of, for example, a train station. They'll proudly put in a ramp, but then there'll be stairs to get up to the path in order to get to the ramp. Or they will have made it so that the bus stop isn't accessible next to the train station. Like they haven't thought about the entire journey. They've just thought about one little bit and they've ticked the box. But what they've created is a really inaccessible transport route for people. And we have to write to the minister and point these things out to them. And they're always terribly sorry and appalled. And then they go and fix it. But how did that happen in the first place? It's extraordinary.
Well, I wrote to the minister last year to transport. That I interviewed a bloke. He's Robbie. I can't remember his last name. He developed this automated ramp that would reach out and meet the train, and it all works on sensors. And he's based in Victoria. And what he's done so far, it seems to be it's going to work really well. It not only goes out and meets the train, but because they can't pull up in the exact same spot all the time, that the ramp can extend outwards, so it does meet those doors. And I asked the minister to look into it and help fund it, and can we adopt that sort of ramp here in New South Wales? And the response back was like you said, we're meeting our needs. Well, no, you're not. They just don't listen.
Yeah. They don't listen. And then they crow about it as well. You know, particularly in transport, we see them crowing about, oh, we've got X% of our train stations are accessible, but they fail to say that they're not fully accessible. They're only accessible if you have someone to help you. That kind of thing, where they sort of fob everything off and make it look better than it is. It's just, it's insulting when people can't even get from A to B in a sensible way. It's extraordinary. Or they'll have like one half of the station. There's so many stations in Sydney where you have accessibility on one side of the station, but if you wanted to come back on that to the same station, you wouldn't be able to get off because there's not a ramp on the other side. So you'd have to get off at a train station one stop further and then get a bus. But then they're very happy to tell you that it's accessible because they've got one half of it being accessible. It's crazy. It's
I went to Gosford railway station in 2012. My mother was dying of cancer at the time, and I rang up State Rail, told them my disabilities. I need assistance on and off the train. I need a ramp. I'm blind and got other disabilities as well. Yep, fine, no problems. We'll have staff there, can help you on the train during the trip. Get on the train. As soon as the train starts moving, the lady said, "Oh, if you want something or want you to go do it now because I haven't got time to help you." So I sat on the train all the way to Gosford, which is about 5 hours, maybe 6. Get off at Gosford station, and I'm expecting a ramp to be there. No ramp. And I said to the bloke, "How am I going to get off?" He said, "I'll hold your arm and I'll help you step out." And I went, "I need a ramp." He said, "No, we haven't got one, but I'll help you." So I didn't have a choice. So he's holding my arm. I stepped out, completely missed the platform, went down between the train and the platform, up to my thigh. Up to my thigh.
Jesus. That's appalling.
And that's at Gosford Station. And Gosford's, it's pretty big now. And I've been going to and from there since the 80s. Well, as I said to you before, it's my old stomping ground. I used to play football for Erina. The station basically hasn't changed since the 80s. And to have that sort of gap between the train and the platform, I know it's an older station, but that means there should be more chances of having a ramp there than anyone else. But I went between the train and the platform right up to my thigh.
Jeez.
Lucky I lost a bit of skin, but a few bruises. But I was able to get up and basically my sister met me at the station. But those sorts of things, like you said, it's disgusting. It shouldn't be happening.
It's just unacceptable.
No, it's totally unacceptable. But again, why does this keep happening? We've been talking about this since what's the International Day of Disabilities? Was it 85 when it first came in?
Sounds about right.
Yeah. So it's 40 years and things still haven't improved. But just getting back to the NDIS, the NDIS is a privilege. It's not a right. And the NDIS has done a lot of good things. Like 19% of its workforce of the NDIS has a disability, which is really good. And it employs about 80,000 support workers through service providers and independent support workers. So it's its own bureaucracy now, very much like Centrelink. But we need to change it, and we need to change it from the top. And I think the first thing we need to do with the NDIS board and the IOC is that both or one of those representatives, organisations, the board or the IOC, we need to elect our own representatives to sort of like an oversight thing saying to the government, you can't be doing this or you can't be doing that. You can't have plan reviews without warning. And, it's just, the government needs to go in and look at the profit margins that some of these companies are making.
Mm.
You know, that's where the cost blowout is, in my opinion, the major part of it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. Yeah.
So what can you do as a state member of parliament to help push changes for the NDIS? I mean, I know you said you've raised it in state parliament, but can you
Yeah.
do anything at a federal level?
Look, most of those federal issues, I work with my colleague Jordan Steele John on those. So he's very much taking it from a sort of federal level. From a state level, you know, our job primarily is to point out where the gaps are and where people are falling behind, but also all of the things that should just be standard in society that then people wouldn't need support, special, you know, sort of tailored support for. So things like having actually accessible transport, those sorts of things are a state responsibility, and so they're the kinds of things that we push for. You know, better funding for supports for kids in schools, that sort of thing, to try and, I guess, yeah, if we just had a more inclusive, disability-friendly world, then half of these things, well, not half, but a big chunk of the issues wouldn't be there and requiring tailored support packages. I guess that's our part of it. And we're very much focused at the moment on foundational supports coming out of the NDIS review, and trying to get the state government to understand that this is an opportunity for it now as it's rolling out foundational supports, that it can, you know, take this opportunity to create a more inclusive society. But yeah, other than that, we'll just keep raising our voice for people with disability to be heard. And yeah, if you've not spoken already with Jordan Steele John, I do recommend it. He's quite the advocate.
Yeah, I've seen him quite a few times speaking at the Senate inquiry. He's a really passionate and articulate man. I'm still not sure, whether, you know, speaking to him, I don't know. There's things I'm aware of that you may not be aware of. That sort of gives me concern. But he's very articulate and very passionate about, you know, the NDIS and what it should be doing. But yeah, I just, with the sustainability of the NDIS, we need to tackle that in a way that's effective. Like I said, you know, with the profit margins some of these companies are making. And I was reading yesterday, like the physiotherapists get $193 an hour, and that's dropping to $183 an hour through the NDIS. But if you were to walk in off the street, go to see a physio, they only charge $105 an hour. But they say they're not making enough through the NDIS, which is $183 an hour. I've seen one woman on YouTube on Current Affairs saying that she employs 21 physiotherapists in her business, and she can't afford to run it. If it goes down $10, and I'm sitting there thinking, how can that be? I looked into workers' comp, and the workers' comp ranges between 1% to 3% of the person's income. And then you've got super on top of that, which is, I think it's 11%. Then you've got annual leave and long service and sick pay and all that. But how can you not run a business from $183 an hour and still make enough money to make a profit? I just don't understand it. I really don't.
No. I will I will keep an eye on, and I'll look at whether there's anything we can do at a state level to regulate state-based providers. I suspect there's not, but I'll have a look at that to see if there's anything that we can do in terms of, I guess if there are people who are sort of skimming off the top of NDIS. I do think it's probably more of a federal issue, but I will see if there's anything we could do at a state level.
Yeah, because I know a friend of mine got home mods done to his place, and the NDIS paid the money for the work home modifications. They paid 100% of it up front.
Yeah, right.
And there were some things that needed fixing up, and he couldn't get the person back for months. So why isn't that staggered? Those payments staggered, like you would do if you're building your own home.
Yeah.
You'd pay 25%, then progress payment. Why doesn't the NDIS do that? Why are they paying 100% up front before they start the job?
Yeah, that seems crazy. It's another good example, isn't it, of just they don't seem to scrutinize that side of the scheme in the same way that they scrutinize the claimants.
Yeah, and another thing, you're talking about state-based. I had someone contact me through LinkedIn about a month ago, 6 weeks ago. They had a friend who just had a baby, and the baby was born with significant genetic issues and disabilities. I mean significant. They reached out to the NDIS to see if they can get the child on to the NDIS. And they were told, no, it's a baby. You have to look after it 24/7 anyway. And I didn't think they're expecting a happy, healthy little baby, which didn't turn out that way. Why isn't the NDIS providing counselling and respite for those parents?
Yeah.
Like Carers Australia, they do a fantastic job. But it's little things like that the NDIS could be looking at and saying, we need to do this case by case. That child, that baby was born, and I'm talking about significant disabilities for the rest of its life. But there's no supports there for the parents.
I think that respite piece is quite big. We're doing an inquiry in New South Wales Parliament again on this foundational supports and what the state should cover. And one of the things that keeps coming up from advocates is the need for funding for respite services and for really the capacity building in families and communities to that should be sort of a core support, I guess, for people with disabilities is the respite piece for carers and families around them as well. It's strange that that's not something the NDIS is covering.
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the biggest faults that any state or federal governments really underestimated. People with disabilities prior to the NDIS, if they couldn't afford something and their family couldn't help to provide a product or a service, then they went without. Then the NDIS comes in, we'll give you all these supports, we'll get you in the community and, so you can participate in its activities and in a dignified and respectful manner and all that. Then, it doesn't work out that way. It's just, I just don't know. It's just, it's so complicated when it doesn't need to be.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But, I don't know. Is there anything else you would like to talk about or mention that, that you're doing?
No, I mean, I think that foundational supports inquiry will be interesting. It's going to be a bit long running, but what's been interesting really is just how little the state government seems to know about what its obligations will be after the NDIS review and what it needs to do. It seems to be a lot of confusion, which is disappointing. And we're already hearing about people being chucked off of the NDIS on the assumption that the state is going to somehow provide the funding for them now. And the state isn't, because it's not prepared. That piece of the puzzle has now been kicked down the road, I think another 6 months to a year in New South Wales. And I think the other states and territories are similar. So just mass confusion. And in the meantime, we've got people who are unable to have the support they need, and it's just unacceptable. But yeah, so watch that space to see where that inquiry goes. But it's disappointing at this point that the government's not up to speed.
Yeah, well, 'cause like I said at the start, when the NDIS came in, the state government basically forced everyone onto the NDIS so it could access disability services to save money. Now they're required to rebuild those services, those organisations. It's not. It's staff, it's real estate, it's software, it's hardware. They've got to do it from the ground up, and they've got to do it quickly. So they better be careful in how they approach it. But postponing any decisions, for 6 months or a year down the track. One of the ladies that goes to the MS support groups I go to, they kicked her off the NDIS.
Yeah.
She has progressive MS.
Yeah. Now what's she supposed to do? It's
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this is where the state government needs to, probably come in and provide that assistance. But there's no government service, state government services anymore.
It's terrible.
But, I will put if people want to contact you, is that okay? It doesn't really matter where they're from in New South Wales, does it?
No, we're happy to. We're always happy to help. My office is happy to receive people's emails at abigail.boyd@parliament.nsw.gov.au. Or you can contact me through our Facebook as well if you look for Abagail Boyd.
Great, thank you for that. Well, thank you for your time this morning. We covered a lot of things, but please keep up the good work. We do need as much help as we can get from those people who are in a position of power and authority, like yourself.
Yeah, we'll keep trying. But yeah, thank you to you and all other advocates who are raising their voice and keeping these issues alive. We'll get there. I'm convinced eventually we'll have a more inclusive society. But
well, that's one thing that with the NDIS that nobody really talks about is that getting people out in the community has been the best educational assistance that anyone could have provided. Getting out in the community and being part of the community is the best education for people who don't have a disability and don't understand disability issues.
Yeah, 100%.
Now know through people getting out back into the community, which is, with the assistance of the NDIS, I think that education has done more in the last 10 years than it has in the last 50.
Yeah,
so
I agree.
All right, we better leave it there because I know you're busy. You've got the storms to contend with.
I do. I do indeed. But it was lovely talking with you.
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether you'd be able to make it this morning with the storms, but I'm glad you did. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Abagail. Okay, thank
you.
All
right. Bye now.
Bye. Okay, everyone, that was MP Abagail Boyd. She gave her information there. I'll put it in the comment section a little bit later on. And if you want to send her an email and get help from Abagail Boyd, she's more than happy to help and listen. And we need more people like that in Parliament, state and federal. All right, we might just leave it there. Thanks everyone for listening, and I'll talk to you in a week or so. Bye.